What's up, y'all? It's Jax here, your favorite non-binary, nerdy, and neurodivergent host with the most, bringing you episode 9 of BGA Analysis, the Convergent case of Hatsuharu Sohma, and our second segment on the highly requested individual profiles on all of the major Fruits Basket characters. We'll all be analyzing them beneath the fine microscope of psychology, sociology, and professional writing techniques. Previously on BGA Analysis, episode 8, the controversial case of Kyoko and Katsuya Honda, I profiled Toru's parents and how, yes, while they may be one of literature's most beloved OTPs as well as one of my own, their relationship still plays off the very tired and frankly predatory trope of the troubled young girl, i.e. a literal child, constantly needing to be rescued and subsequently romantically involved with a grown-ass adult man. Something I also touch upon in episode 7 of BGA Analysis, which, again, thanks to y'all, is sitting at over 10,000 views. You can find both videos on our IGTV and on my own personal YouTube, which you should totally subscribe to for even more in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining content. For today's video, and in honor of the Year of the Ox, sometimes known as the Bull, let's take a closer look at everyone's favorite lost boy and, in my own humble opinion, best boy, Hatsuharu Sohma. There will definitely be major manga and anime spoilers, so if you're trying to watch the final season spoiler-free, this is your last chance to click out of this video now. Like many of the Zodiac members, Hatsuharu's name carries a seasonal theme, translating roughly into first spring and typically representing one of the months and seasons during which calves and oxen are born. As per the old Zodiac legend, the ox would have been the first of the Zodiac animals to reach God's banquet, were it not for the rat, whom, unlike the rest of the Zodiac animals that chose to walk the entire way, rode along the back of the ox, jumping off at the last second and supposedly tricking the ox in order to become the first to reach the banquet. Very much like the curse itself, the notion that the ox was stupid, dumb, and foolish for allowing the rat to use him was also passed down amongst the Sohma family, permanently branding each Sohma member possessed by the ox as, well, let's say intellectually deficient as their animal spirit. This is just one of many literary elements that makes Fruits Basket the brilliantly written masterpiece that it is. I'm specifically talking about how accurately this series depicts the repercussions of how a verbally, psychologically, and physically abusive family will undoubtedly produce a child with significant trauma that will be driven, whether consciously or subconsciously, to adapt maladaptive coping, defense, and ultimately survival mechanisms in order to endure the resulting pain, following them long into adulthood or, in many tragic instances, from cradle to grave. Think about for me, if you will, the many times we often see, whether in our favorite TV show or in actual real life, a young child being relentlessly teased by their own family, friends, schoolmates, associates, and other children. Both as children and as adults, we're often told and subsequently tell ourselves that the teasing is all in good fun. It's harmless simply because it's coming from our loved ones. You know, the people that are actually supposed to be building us up. The sad truth is that oftentimes teasing is just a really not subtle cover for outright bullying and belittling someone. However, if it's passed off as, let's say, a form of love, well, that's where things can get a little complicated. In the Black community, and yes, I said the Black community because I am blackety black, and I am speaking about my own blackety experiences in this Black community, so please spare me the all communities conversation. You will find this type of teasing especially prevalent. There is a huge difference between someone laughing with you at their own expense and someone forcing themselves to laugh because everyone else is having a good time. Why ruin the quote-unquote peace, right? What's worse is when the teasing is done at the expense of the other person who are either unable to perceive that they are being made fun of, or worse, someone who is acutely aware of the fact that they are being teased. However, their abusers think they're too slow to realize they're being made fun of, which in turn only amplifies the teasing because the bullies genuinely believe that they can continue to get away with it so long as their victim keeps up the facade of being blissfully unaware. And yeah, sometimes it is in just good fun. Even my closest friends and I will crack jokes about one another, but we also know each other well enough to know where that line is. From personal experience, we all understand and know that there's no fun to be had at the expense of knowing that our jokes are slowly ebbing away at each other's confidence, all the while replacing it with crippling insecurity about certain things we were already unsure of. It's not a matter of being sensitive. It's a matter of being considerate and empathetic of and towards those insecurities that your close friend and or family has deeply trusted you with enough to not later hold that over them, much less for the sake of a cheap laugh. In a still developing child, or hell, even a fully grown adult, this could lead to one of three possible outcomes that can also be seen as either stages of progression or regression. Number 1, the child and or adult will simply go on enduring the abuse and not speaking up about it even when provoked, awkwardly laughing alongside their potential abusers if it means keeping the peace, all while compartmentalizing what's being said, which in turn can lead to them believing the negative things they're constantly being bullied over. Number 2, the child and or adult still compartmentalize everything, but that compartmentalization results in growing resentment, which in turn festers into sorrow, fueled anger, hatred, and a genuine disdain for not only themselves, but everyone else around them that is perpetuating this. This could possibly lead to perpetuating the same abusive behavior mirrored by the adults and other bullies, of whom essentially nurtured those negative emotions within the child or adult. Without a proper means of expressing this frustration, it could realistically lead to outbursts of violence, be it physical, verbal, or psychological, whether against themselves, those perpetuating the verbal abuse, or innocent bystanders. Number 3, the child and or adult eventually learns what is being said and done to them isn't right, resulting in them possibly standing up for themselves and bringing an end to the teasing. If their circumstances are one of safety and security, they may also choose to confide in other safe adults, as well as friends and prospective confidants, who can positively mediate and effectively remedy the situation for the better. In this particular instance, Hatsuharu would not only experience and exhibit the aforementioned stages of both progression and regression in regard to how he dealt with literal generations of verbal abuse, but we can also see how perpetuated abuse is the core cause of Hatsuharu's dissociative disorders. I say dissociative disorders as opposed to DID or dissociative identity disorder because dissociative disorders are a spectrum that include dissociative identity disorder. And Hatsuharu's particular dissociative disorders appear to be comorbid, meaning I personally believe that at least 2 of the 4 forms of dissociative identity disorders are possibly present within him. The first being dissociative fugue, where a person can, and without any warning, forget who they are or their past. A person in the midst of a dissociative fugue may not even realize they're experiencing memory loss, going so far as to create an entirely new identity. They will also, wait for it, travel thousands of kilometers and miles away from home for hours, days, or even months. Typically, when the person comes out of this fugue state, they have no recollection of their experiences. It's often played for laughs that Hatsuharu will find himself starting out in one place, but completely forgetting where or how he was meant to wind up, usually finding his way there by sheer chance days later. The second dissociative disorder is the most commonly known but also commonly misunderstood, DID or dissociative identity disorder. Let's take a look at Hatsuharu's core personality. Look at him. He's a naturally chill, relaxed, and really impressively unbothered sort, almost to the point of being a total pacifist, in that he would rather mediate a prospective conflict in order to avoid having to engage it later. And sure, he gets angry and will remember being angry, but that's only because he hasn't been pushed to that limit to where Dark Haru needs to intervene. Dark Haru, however, is a direct result of Hatsuharu himself being unable to rectify the violent urges that were nurtured in him as a result of all of the consistent abuse and trauma he'd endured as a result of the quote-unquote shitty adults and other shitty kids in his life. Specifically, the other adults who didn't protect him and the other Zodiac members from not only other members of the Soma family, but specifically Akito and the adults that shaped her. How does one so young cope with all of that guilt and the guilt of expressing how they truly feel? Hatsuharu's subconscious created Dark Haru as a defense mechanism to protect Hatsuharu's psyche from the pain of the overwhelming negative emotions that were not only nurtured in him, but the ones that he were told himself were wrong. Hatsuharu couldn't do anything alone, but Dark Haru, oh, he didn't mind getting his hands dirty, and that came with the blissful frustration of Hatsuharu not having to remember Dark Haru's actions or words, even if it's what Hatsuharu generally, albeit guiltily, feels in his heart. What points more to Dark Haru being a resulting combination of dissociative identity disorder and dissociative fugue is that Hatsuharu's naturally pacifist identity is completely suppressed and subsequently possessed. Hatsuharu, as well as the people around him, are very well aware of Dark Haru's presence within him. Hatsuharu knows Dark Haru exists, and as the series continues, we see Hatsuharu doing his best to consciously control when he decides to let Dark Haru out. Fortunately, towards the end of the series, Hatsuharu finds a balance where he can successfully merge both of his personalities into one core true self that he is in complete control of at all times. As a sidebar, it's actually what makes him such a great foil character to one of his closest friends, cousins, and rivals, Kyo. When you look at them as both having these metaphorically violent beasts within them, and their journeys being one of learning to acknowledge and accept themselves, it frames their relationship in a completely different light. I bring all of this up because over the course of Fruits Basket, we as the audience were led to believe that Dark Haru is just the result of him being possessed by the ox. You know, the whole black-white yin-yang thing. I mean, we all know bulls and oxen's temperaments are famous for supposedly being known to turn on a dime, right? Well, very much like how oxen and bulls often need to be goaded into anger by an outside force, we see that the majority of the trauma in Hatsuharu's life was the direct result of the people around him, be they adults or children, constantly teasing him about being the slow and stupid ox, particularly Akito, but nonetheless ultimately resulted in Dark Haru. Listen y'all, Hatsuharu didn't just wake up one day and choose violence. Violence chose him continually, and Dark Haru is a survival, coping, and defense mechanism and manifestation to help him deal with everything traumatic in his life. This brings me to how Hatsuharu was gradually able to accept and subsequently become one with Dark Haru, and it has everything to do with how Hatsuharu allowed himself to trust other people despite having plenty of reason not to. Let's first examine his relationship with Yuki, the one of whom he perceived to be the source of all of his woes. Upon Hatsuharu confronting Yuki about how it was supposedly all his fault, that everyone thought of him as nothing more than the stupid cow who got tricked by the rat, Yuki himself asks Hatsuharu if he's truly a fool like everyone says he is, encouraging Hatsuharu to think for himself, revealing the mental and metaphorical yoke that the adults in Akito used to keep Hatsuharu ensnared to his hatred for Yuki. Yuki tells Hatsuharu he doesn't believe he's a fool, ultimately becoming one of his only friends. It's in this moment that Hatsuharu develops a deep, sincere love for Yuki, and one I can't help but think reframes the old story of how the rat supposedly tricked the ox. Isn't it entirely possible that the ox himself, being as kind as he is, willingly allowed the rat to ride upon his back to the banquet? We often see in Yuki and Hatsuharu's relationship that Hatsuharu is always looking out for people, especially Yuki, always protecting him and putting him first. It stands to reason that the ox knew that the rat, being the smallest and the most vulnerable of the zodiac, simply wanted to see his friend get to the banquet safely, caring very little if he made it first or not. And that act of kindness, like many other true aspects of the real story of God and the Chinese zodiac animals, were simply overwritten to make it seem like the ox had been tricked, framing his kindness as a negative. Hatsuharu's next significant relationship, and one I could not wait to see animated, was that of his relationship with his future wife and the mother of their two twin children, Isuzu Sohma. And yes, y'all, they're cousins, distant or otherwise. Like I said in episode 2 of BGA Analysis, I'm certainly not going to judge them. Why? Because in the context of zodiac members only being able to procreate with one another due to the whole changing into an animal thing, when hugged by a member of the opposite sex not of the Chinese zodiac, I would say that certainly narrows down the dating pool significantly. So at least in the context of this particular story, it makes narrative sense at least. Hatsuharu and Rin met as children, with Rin being 2 years younger than Hatsuharu and a year younger than Kagura. And yes, while people will be uncomfortable with that knowledge, I can at least say that I'm more comfortable with that compared to the whopping age gap between Kyoko and Katsuya, the former of which was a whole child when she began associating with the latter, who, I say again, was a grown-ass adult man. Hatsuharu was one of the first people to stick up for Rin when her family began viciously abusing her, especially psychologically and physically, with Rin and Hatsuharu becoming each other's support systems in an already unstable family situation. Y'all, what I think is so cute and funny is the notion that Haru wanted to wait until he was taller than Rin before confessing his feelings to her. It's a small detail, but it's one of those details that kind of matters. This culminated in a confession that led to the two of them sleeping together for the first time and subsequently entering a supposedly secret relationship. And the reason why I love these two together so much, and why I say Hatsuharu is one of the best boys, not just in Fruits Basket, but in literary history, is because unlike so many of the toxic and bastard boyfriends we find in shoujo, josei, yaoi, and mainstream anime and media, is that Haru is never once violent, nor does he direct any of his anger towards Rin. He genuinely cherishes her without needing to demean her or be aggressive to her in any capacity. Their relationship is arguably one of the healthiest ones in the entire series. Even with Rin doing all she can to push Hatsuharu away from her, the two truly tried their best to protect the other in their own ways, yes, and sometimes it didn't go the way it should have, but for them being traumatized children and trying to survive a very vengeful and hateful god that had no problem attempting to literally kill Rin, I would say they still come out on top as one of the best, healthiest relationships in the series canon. Moreover, even when the curse is broken, Hatsuharu doesn't guilt trip Rin for not being able to forgive Akito like everyone else in the family seemingly has. He lets her work through her complicated feelings for Akito on her own, not telling her what she should feel, but simply being there to support her no matter what decision she comes to. And what I especially love is that we can see the type of people and parents Hatsuharu and Rin later become, through how healthy and happy their own children are, portrayed as being in the sequel, Fruits Basket Another. I'll even go so far to say that the children of Hatsuharu and Rin, Kyo and Toru, Yuki and Machi, and everyone else of the zodiac we know and love are essentially the healthiest versions of what their parents could have been and would later become without the weight of the zodiac curse or trauma hindering their initial development. And of course, while Hatsuharu himself becomes the person we can all be so proud of, I can safely say that he and we have his relationships with Yuki, Rin, Kisa, Toru, and every positive figure in his life, along with Natsuki Takei's brilliant characterization of him, to thank that would shape him into one of shoujo's, if not the literary world's, most beloved characters to ever exist. That's it for this video. Thanks again for watching, everyone. You've all been amazing. Stay tuned for episode 10 of BGA Analysis, The Complex Case of Kyo Soma. This has been Jax-Prince with Black Girls Anime LLC. Be sure to follow me at JackJackAttack across all social media, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Black Girls Anime LLC for more in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining analyses of your favorite anime, manga, video games, hentai, and more, all for the culture.